Welcome back to the Mutts Podcast. We've got two guests today from Mindbuffs. We've got Matt Moissac and Alex Schinke. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and we're joined by Bosco as well, Joshua Watmarsh. Bosco, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys all doing?
Great. Yeah, really good day so far.
Nice.
Yeah.
Alex, you're doing good?
Yeah.
That's
Sunday.
good.
It's nice.
Yeah, I know exactly. So the weather's been a bit chippy, but we've been pretty much getting lucky so far here. So so I guess like before we jump into things, obviously we cover hockey on here, and I just like to get your guys' kind of perspective on what you guys saw so far in the NHL season. We'll start with you, Matt. Locally with the Oilers, what's your overall thoughts on what you see?
Well, I see a lot. Obviously, I don't like getting too much into like kind of like mind theory to say, what a player must be thinking or what a coach must be thinking. But this year definitely presents a lot of different challenges for certain types of players, I would say. Not having the fans and just the way that the schedule is, that I think it'll be interesting to see throughout the course of the year, like what kind of players are able to kind of continue to thrive through not having fans, not having that external energy, and which players you might see be a little bit more inconsistent throughout the season because they're having to kind of generate that emotion or that motivation themselves without having a crowd to support them. So I definitely have been kind of watching a few players that way. And obviously from the coaching perspective, I mean, having these taxi squads and playing so many games and just preparing in case you have 4 injuries in the game, it's a challenge that coaches I don't think have faced before. So there's just a lot of new variables that makes it interesting outside of being a fan to kind of see how all these pieces kind of are at play throughout the year.
Nice. Alex, and yourself, what's your thoughts on the Oilers and how things going so far, like with what you're seeing in the hockey world?
I agree with what Matt said, but I'm actually most curious to see what new rivalries are like born out of this. Playing, teams around 10 times is so different. So I know there's like the historical ones like Edmonton and Calgary, but I'm really curious to see if there's more because of how often they're playing each other. So
yeah,
I'm also excited to see what happens there.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's going to be, it's interesting, different, and it's different because the scheduling, and we just had Elliot Freeman on, so we kind of went into, it looks like this might be just a one-off too. So, but we'll see what happens going forward here. But so Matt, let our listeners know, and if you can, and put us in, what Mindbuffs is, how it started, and when did it start?
Yeah. So Mindbuffs has kind of been an idea that I've had in the back of my mind for probably 5 or 6 years. Kind of in that moment when I decided to transition from coaching to becoming a sports psychologist. I had kind of an overall vision of wanting to kind of create a collective of sports psychologists that worked at making sports psychology and mental health just in general more commonplace within sports, and honestly, specifically hockey. And I also had the work that I was doing, I wanted to impact both esports and the corporate world. And these were, things that I kind of first saw happening slowly over time in my career. But then here I go running into Alex Schinke. And after only a few months of kind of working together and kind of talking about the different dreams and goals that we had, I mean, it was kind of eerie how similar these goals that we had were. And so kind of the timeline that I saw some of these things playing out really shortened, because basically we were able to do double the work together by working at the same kinds of goals. And so we've really been able to make a lot of gain a lot of ground in hockey, and esports has been picking up, and the corporate side of our work too has been really exciting. And so it's just kind of like this vision to bring performance psychology, what we know with high performance people, and to bring it to as many areas that we can that are really responsible for high level development and high level identity formation. And so, yeah, it's just really exciting having someone like Alex to really work together side by side at.
Nice. That's perfect. And Alex, when did you join Mindbuffs, and how has it been since joining, and your experience, and how excited is this opportunity in your life?
Yeah, it's well, I guess first things first, when Matt and I first met, we had a lot of conversations about, like Matt said, our goals and our visions for sport and performance psychology and how we're gonna use it to help change some sport culture, but also it just kind of like blossomed. I don't even know, like there wasn't like a definitive like moment. It was just like after having conversations, and there's not very many sports psychologists, at least here in Edmonton, doing it full time. So for Matt and I to be out of the same building and a male and a female sports psychologist is really just unheard of right now. So we definitely bring in different perspectives that way, but it's like really just been growing and growing and growing over these past few weeks. So and like Matt said, it's exciting and new, and we're just excited to see where it goes. So
yeah. And Matt, when you first started this, like where did it really start for you? Was it at a young age? And when you first started, how has it grown? Has it grown since you've done it, like started doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep some of these talking points a little short, but I mean, my dad played professional hockey growing up, so naturally, like I were to follow in the same footsteps, and so gave a hockey career a go, and having gone through a lot of injuries and mental health, anxiety things myself, and I had no idea how to cope with any of that stuff. I think we had one sports psychologist work with one club team I was with, but it was like kind of like a team session, one-off. And so you really kind of had this feeling that you were kind of doing the fight alone. And so when my career abruptly ended at 19, kind of had to, figure my stuff out, and was fortunate enough to actually see a therapist, and kind of pointed me in the direction of at least psychology without having kind of a clear goal in my early 20s of what I wanted that to look like. And after I was done being bitter about hockey and reintroduced myself back to it, I started coaching. And that's really where this really kicked off. I mean, the last year that I coached was the minor midget AAA with CAC. That year we were playing against, like, Carter Hart was the goalie for Sherwood Park. That was kind of like that age group. And I'll never forget that year. That really was the defining year that took what was maybe a hopeful idea to realizing that it could actually happen, and that becoming a sports psychologist wasn't just a cool thought. That year, we were told by the organization, by parents, by so many people in the hockey world that brace for impact. It's going to be a tough year. These kids have never had a winning season. You're really going to struggle. And so we're getting all this negative information to start the season off. And so I coached with a guy, Steve McLeod. He still coaches with CEC. He's a beauty. And he was kind of the X's and O's guys. And I really worked at kind of developing like the players more one-on-one. And we finished 7th place going into playoffs. Our goal was just kind of to make it. But then something just happened. The players had bought into what we were doing, and each one of them felt like they had like an integral role on the team. And come playoffs, we had to get a tie against Sherwood Park, against Carter Hart, to make it to provincials, and call the timeout. And you know how most coaches, when they call a timeout, they bring out that fancy old board and they start drawing X's and O's. But what was different with that team was that I had done some personality tests with the players, and the five of the 6 guys that I had selected were very creative hockey players. Didn't really think within the lines. They just kind of created on the ice. And so I knew that by creating like a play, it would actually kind of add extra variables that they didn't need to have to create offense. So I took the whiteboard, I chucked it behind me, and it said, just go have fun and create something. And of course, I'm only telling the story because within 3 seconds of the faceoff, they put the puck in the net. But from that moment, I didn't have to do anything. The players were coaching themselves, and we qualified for provincials, and we won every single game except one in provincials, and ended up winning the final game 4-0. And it was just incredible to see that when players were given an opportunity to thrive, when they had belief in themselves because of teammates and coaches being 100% bought into them as a person, that their performance skyrocketed to levels that we couldn't even foresee. And before that year, I thought maybe I'd give coaching a full-time ride, but after seeing what happened that season, I realized, no, I want to be a sports psychologist and try to impact beyond one team at a time. And that's where Mindbuffs really kind of became more of a reality.
Yeah. No, I'd say that, and it's a great thing that you started here. And Alex, for you, you come from an athletic background too. So talk about your, involvement and coming into Mindbuffs, and obviously you guys have degrees in this. So talk about that and talk about the way it started for you and how much this means to you to be helping, sports teams and sports athletes.
So for me, I draw a lot of my experiences when I was a figure skater. I was a competitive skater out at the Royal Glenora out here in Edmonton for a number of years. And I don't know if you guys know a lot about skating, but it's trained pretty much all day, every day, and competitions come like once a month. And if you don't get the points, you don't move on, you don't get to go to the big competition. So there was a lot of pressure on us as skaters. And I got really bad performance anxiety because it was like all boiling down to like really 3 minutes, and that was your shot every time you went in. And so I thought, and then eventually, like Matt said, it was kind of like injuries start to happen, and I decided to leave skating, and I thought that performance anxiety was just going to stay at the rink and it wasn't going to bug me anymore. Then only it worked like that. And then I decided to, again, play other sports. Like I played competitive volleyball, soccer, lacrosse. Like I kind of did every sport under the sun. And I noticed that performance anxiety was still sticking with me. I also noticed it in school, friends, work. Like it really started to kind of be more evident in my daily life. And for me, the biggest turning point was that kind of 18, 19 year old, because it's a big transition year. You're coming out of high school, you have to figure out your career, is what people say. You're making all these big life choices. And that was the moment for me. And leaving competitive sports, a lot of those sports I was playing, I couldn't play. It was kind of like done. And so I had a lot of identity stuff come out too, like who am I without competitive sports, and what am I going to do to fill all this time I have? And then that took me in through my bachelor's degree, and I really started to really just buy into psychology, and then graduated and decided to apply for a master's degree. And I did that while I was working. And like I said, it was just all these thoughts, especially as a figure skater, like I could have used a sports psychologist 100%. Do I ever think like I still to this day don't think I reached my full potential as a skater, because I was going out with this like fear of failure every time I went into competition. It was like totally holding me back. I trained all day, every day, and I was in probably the best physical shape, but yet couldn't really push through that. So like I said, I think it's something that I like to help athletes push through, but also I remember trying to have these conversations about anxiety, and it was like immediately shut down. It was like, oh, you're fine. You're going to push through it. Don't worry about it. Or people just would shudder and not know what to say and like walk away. And it was like, never could talk about it. And so that was kind of the other driving force, was like, we need to start to have these conversations. I know I'm not the only athlete that has experienced performance anxiety or just anxiety in general. So just starting to have these conversations so athletes really don't feel so alone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Matt, what do you see in the sporting world? Like, why do you think mental health is not often talked about in the locker room or, publicly on, in interviews? Why is there a stigma to it in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of two simple facts. One being far more complex. One, athletes in general, I think the idea of seeing a psychologist is just kind of a sign of weakness. If I need to go talk to someone else about what's happening in my internal world, there's something wrong with me. I shouldn't need to have to do that. And so there's definitely always kind of been this weakness complex behind, seeking help from other people. But the second thing that is far more problematic, I think, is just within the hockey of culture itself. That, I'm sure you guys know that once that locker room is established, it's like castle walls. Like nothing enters that room at all. And what's difficult is that there aren't the tools within the culture to deal with the mental stuff or the emotional stuff. So when problems do arise, or when players start losing confidence, there isn't a language or an understanding of the human brain to be able to equip these players with excelling through those challenges. And so everything has kind of always been kept in closed doors. When you look at the other professional sports, the big three, basketball, football, baseball, all of those teams, it is mandated that a psychologist be part of the organization, part of the team. Hockey's not there yet. So hockey's kind of always been a little bit behind when it comes to picking up the latest research in sport and performance psychology without seeing it like as a threat. And Alex and I have several different stories of, working with teams where the players are really bought in, but the coach almost sees us as a threat and doesn't see the value in what we're doing. And if the coach doesn't see the value in what we're doing, then what we're doing is almost meaningless, because the coach is so important, so integral to establishing that culture. And then we've worked with organizations who just think that they don't need sports psychology to improve the performance of their players. And this is, we get these stories, these doors closing all the time in hockey. I've had several different other sports psychologists basically go, good luck when I'm trying to, get into those locker rooms. So yeah, there's a lot of hurdles in the way. And so we know that this isn't going to be something that changes overnight. And so we're going to take it slow and steady.
Yeah. And for you, Alex, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah. So everything Matt said, but the biggest, I would say the biggest barriers too is this idea of confidentiality and the misconceptions that come with that. Mm-hmm. Our work as psychologists, Matt and I are bound by a legal and ethical code to keep everything that happens in session stays between us. And usually a lot of players are really worried about information getting leaked, whether it's to coaches or public or other teammates and stuff like that. So we are, like said, we have this code, this legal code that we really have to abide by. And that, like I said, things are kept between us and our clients. And I think that's something that's really important to put out there.
Yeah.
When Nathan McKinnon on Spit and Chick, was that two years ago? He talked about how he saw a sports psychologist. Like, I almost fell out of my chair because that was like the first time I think I'd ever heard a hockey player say those words before, and I'd really hope that would kind of open up more conversations, because you're seeing it in especially basketball. Players are talking about mental health all the time now in sports psychology, and so that confidentiality piece, there's no trust there yet between us and hockey yet.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, one thing that kind of struck a chord with me is you were talking about when you're in the final game, you had to call the timeout and you didn't draw up a play, you just let the kids go out and do their thing. The one that it struck a chord with me because my younger boy, when he was 10, he was lucky enough to play in this big hockey tournament called the Brick in West. So he was fortunate enough, the game went to overtime and the coach called him in, and he was one of the 3 kids that got to go on the ice. So they ended up winning the game on that shift. So that night on our drive home, I said, hey, so what did the coach say to you guys? And I thought exactly what you said. He said, he came up to us, Dad, and he said, I believe in you guys. You guys are great hockey players. Go do what you do. We believe in you. And that was it. And then sure enough, they went out and scored. I'm like, that was nothing to do about go to this spot, go over here, go do this. Just go be 10 and go do what you do because you're good at hockey, right? It was fantastic. Just, I'm like, man, I almost cried when I even just told you that, let alone when I heard my kid say that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I'm covered in shivers right now. Like when you hear stories like that of like people in authority having belief in their athletes, you cannot quantify the difference that makes for those kids. And that story is incredible.
Yeah, it was wild. So what do you guys do specifically with athletes, young, whether the kids or adults at Mindbuffs? If I came to see you or my child came to see you, what are you guys doing?
Want to have at this first, or you want me to?
You can go first.
Okay. So I typically start working with kiddos as young as the Pee-wee age, or what is it called now? U13?
U13, yeah.
Yeah, U13. I've seen younger age athletes, but At that age, when they're around like 11 years old, the brain is really open to kind of understanding and being able to interpret what they're experiencing inside. And so a lot of our early work is around self-awareness, helping athletes understand, what their thoughts are, where they're coming from, what their feelings are, what it feels like, why they're feeling it, is really just is creating a foundation of understanding so that they can begin to interpret what they're experiencing in their internal world. Because Alex and I don't go immediately to like traditional sports psych tools, because if there isn't an understanding by the athlete to interpret what they're experiencing, those tools are like putting a square peg in a round hole. It's just not going to work. So the foundation of what we do is helping athletes understand their values, their personality, their interests, their strengths. And from those big four things, then we kind of build tools and skills on top of that strong foundation.
Great. Now, as far as peak performance, can you speak to us about that and details and how you go about getting the kids and adults to there?
Yeah.
Stage,
We're going to talk about two different things here: mindfulness and meditation, and really the piece de resistance in terms of where we want to take sports psychology is something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that or not, but okay, yeah. So we're going to talk about that, because that really is something that at Mindbuffs we're wanting to kind of set ourselves apart with. And is really exciting. So to begin with, we do start with mindfulness and meditation. When we look at peak performance is the ability to get into flow state and stay in it as long as possible. Once we're in flow state, that's where all the magic happens, right? The best way that we know how to train to get in there is meditation. Meditation is simply the practice of focusing on one thing at a time, the most important thing in each given moment. And when we look at flow state is the top of the triangle, the pinnacle of being able to just be focused on only the one thing that matters most from moment to moment to moment. So the way that we train that is meditation. We get guys sitting quietly, focusing only on their breath for 5, 10, 15, if they can get up to 20 minutes, that's kind of like the gold standard in the day, and just training the brain to do the opposite of what society trains us to do, to not be distracted, to not think we can multitask, to not think we can split focus and still be at our best. And so being able to train the brain that no, what we want, regardless of what we're doing, is to be fully present in our relationships, at school, during an exam, while we're in a game. And that is where we get to maximize all of the hours and hard work that we're putting in. So that's kind of like the beginning of what we do. And then EMDR. Did you want to touch a little bit on EMDR, or want me to?
Yeah, I'll explain it and then you can kind of fill in.
Yeah.
So EMDR really targets our negative core beliefs that we have about ourselves. So the most common ones I see, and I know Matt would agree, is I'm not good enough. I have to be in control, or I'm responsible for everything, or just this like fear of failure that kind of drives us. And so what happens is we have these experiences, whether it's like athletes or like us as kids. And so again, I'll use I'm not good enough as an example. Is maybe you do really crappy on a test. Your brain's going to like autofill and say like, okay, I didn't do good, so therefore I'm not good enough. So I'm going to place this event into that box. And so, or like I said, maybe you make a really crappy pass in a hockey game and your brain's going to be like, wow, I'm not good enough. Why am I here? How did I make this team? It's all going to go into that box. So EMDR really targets these belief systems that we have about ourselves. And the goal of it really is to stay so much in the negative that our brain's going to eventually get so uncomfortable that it's going to move straight into something more positive. So maybe instead of going right to I'm not good enough, you're going to go into, okay, I am good enough, or that was just a setback. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make it through, or redeem myself, or whatever you want to say instead. So it really starts to reprogram these connections we have in our brains. And then I don't know, Matt, what else do you have that?
Yes. So to build on top of that, like what we know about the human brain now is that 2/3 of it is what we know as the default mode network. 2/3 of our brain is responsible for protection and threat detection. And that could be if you're out for a walk, you're in school, you're playing a game, literally 2/3 of our brain is wired at all times to make sure that we are okay. So what happens is if we make a mistake, our brain's gonna be like, oh, is this embarrassing? Or is the coach gonna get mad at us? Are we gonna lose ice time? Or our teammates not gonna trust us? All of these thoughts will generate if at the core of it is that belief, I'm not good enough. The reason why traditional sports psychology isn't as effective as it can be is because it just targets what are my thoughts, what are my feelings. It doesn't actually address what generates those thoughts and feelings. Our core beliefs are where these things come from. And so if you're an athlete and the last 2 times you had a shot in the slot, you missed the net or hit the goalie, instead of you being like, find the open net, focus on the mesh, your brain's like, do not miss this shot. Last time you missed this shot, you were sitting pine for the next 3 shifts. And so your brain only cares about your protection. And it saw that you sitting on the bench or you getting demoted as a threat. So it's going to make you really tight to prepare for making a mistake. And so what we do is rather than being like, yeah, just ignore that, you'll be fine. Here's some positive thinking. Those have its place, but we get right to the core, the actual belief that generates that fear. And so that's why Emdr is so incredible, is that we now understand how to rewire those experiences, like Alex said, that are in that box of I'm not good enough. And we can relocate those experiences to more adaptive places so that even if you make a mistake, the brain's not immediately going into that threat detection mode. So it's really cool things, really exciting stuff that happens in our one-on-one sessions.
And how long would this generally take? How many sessions for somebody to get to something where they can actually quantify it as, wow, this is working. I can see my level from here to here to here type of thing.
That's a really great question. I've worked with some athletes where it took 1 session. I get a kid coming in who got hit from behind the net, and he had a pretty severe concussion, had to wait 3 months. And I'm not sure, what position you guys played, but as a defenseman going around the net to pick up the puck, if the last time you were there, you got obliterated, pretty sure all of your being is going to be like, heads up, look out. And we did 1 session of EMDR, and all of a sudden he could think of that memory, that time when he got blew up behind the net. No fear, no anxiety, wasn't scared, and was actually excited to get back on the ice. Now that happens sometimes, but then there's some athletes we work with that have really complex histories where that belief, I'm not good enough, spans across 4 or 5 different environments. And we need, 5, 6, maybe even more months of kind of once a week work to really make an impact for that person. But yeah, those one-off sessions, they happen. They're pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how Mindbuffs can help with the mental health side of things and how important it is today and how it can really actually help children specifically, if you can?
Yeah.
Well, what Matt kind of already touched on, it is really building up that self-awareness, and what I touched on, that identity development. And I know Matt can speak to this, and I don't know about what your guys' thoughts are, but like I said, when I left the sporting, like the really competitive sport worlds that I was in, and then it was like, well, now what? Right. And I know with Matt, when he left hockey at 19 too, it was like, well, now what? And so it's how do we kind of make athletes more well-rounded so it's not just sport as well. Because like, I know life happens sometimes, and likes to throw us some curveballs. So again, giving us, like I said, a more shaped identity, as well as like building up that self-awareness is especially really key with the young athletes that I'm noticing. And then also giving them the strategies to be able to deal with the anxiety or depression or whatever they're experiencing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Matt's going to touch a little bit more on, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this is a rather complex question that I think would require a really long conversation to go into all the specifics. But my ultimate hope is that, with Mindbuffs, working with these young athletes, and we talk about culture being a reason why there's so much stigma still with sports psychology and hockey. My hope is that, with Mindbuffs, that we can work with the younger generations, that as they go to club and junior and college and make it pro, that they are bringing this new sense of understanding and awareness of how important the internal world is. And that becomes the new norm. I don't think you can go top down here. I think it's got to be grassroots up. And so that's kind of what we're trying to focus on is not that we don't work with professional athletes or don't want to work with more of them, but if we really focus at the younger ages like you talked about, then we're really helping foster a stronger sense of the need to have these kinds of conversations in sport.
Both my kids are, one's 14, one's 11. Both have been lucky enough to have fabulous coaches on their way up.
Nice.
Both played high levels of hockey. Not once has anybody brought in a sports psychologist, or even it's never even been discussed, which I find it's very interesting, I guess. But it should obviously be. I think it definitely could help them. I don't know what to say to my kid or when to say. I help coach my little guy, and kids are all over the place. They're up or they're down. I don't know what. If it's the right thing or the wrong thing to say to them. One thing I found with my older boy is he's very, I don't know if you can touch on this, post games.
Yeah.
He'll come out, he plays AAA hockey, so he's a good hockey player, but he's not a superstar on his team. But after games, I'll think he's played well, and I'm usually a realist, and he'll come off and I'll say, hey, God, good job, buddy. Oh, I wasn't very good today. And then the next game, I only got that one goal. Oh, you know what, I made that bad pass. In his world, I'd say for sure over 50% of the games, he doesn't think he played well. And in my world, he's 90% of the time he's playing just fine. I mean, he's not Wayne Gretzky, but he's doing just fine for what he is.
Yeah.
Why is that? Or how can I help him with that? How about that?
Great question. You want to take a stab at it first, or do you want me to?
You go for it.
Okay. So yeah, I'd say, I've talked to a lot of parents that share a similar story, right? Great parents, great coaches, and yet how come my kid is just bombarded with so much negativity so after these games? Again, I wish it was a simple explanation, but somewhere along the line, he picked up enough evidence and information from other players, other coaches, watching other athletes, that the first thing that his brain is going to go to is, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? Right? Kind of like that. I can't let this happen. It's unacceptable. I can't, this isn't acceptable. I need to be better. And that goes within that understanding of how the brain works again with that I'm not good enough. Even if it's a small part, if only a small part of the brain believes I'm not good enough, that part of the brain is going to be trained to like immediately find all the holes in a performance or all the holes that in school or a conversation with family. And so we can still utilize that school to be able to break down the game in a way that you can take away positives. But if at the core there is that belief I'm not good enough, he doesn't really have control over going into those negative places. That's just how his brain is hardwired, because again, the culture of sport still kind of models that it's not good enough, that you have to be perfect. And with a kid at your age, it wouldn't take very long to be able to kind of shift that, so where he can notice the mistake, but rather than internalizing it as like, it's not good enough, you're like, yeah, I know all my mistakes. I'm going to go to practice tomorrow and now focus on what I can do to improve that. It's a subtle shift that doesn't typically take quite long with Alex and I. And it's not because of anything that one coach did or one parent did. It's just years and years of the brain trying to interpret information in a way that makes it efficient and effective for the person to retrieve. Okay, in the same way where if you look at a dog, you don't have to pause looking at the dog going, okay, what kind of brown? Okay, what color? So we just know what it is. So the brain is so efficient, sometimes it's too efficient. And so we have to break down some of these negative spaces and retrain the brain on how to think more positively in those situations.
Great.
Yeah, and like what Matt said, could be of something that kind of developed over time. As I said, like our brain will take all these events and put them into boxes. The other common thing that I was kind of hearing what you're saying, and that Matt and I see actually in a lot of athletes, is the fear of failure. There's so much of that in sport culture. And like, even when I think back to skating, if you didn't get the points, you didn't move on, or like even hockey, it's really a game about, good performances and mistakes and all these other things that come into it. And it's trying to shift that so that there is more positive talk and better communication between whether it's coaches, parents, and athletes. And like I said, kind of shifting it that way. So I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And great comments and great thoughts from you guys. So I guess one final question I would have is, in hockey, we always talk about the crazy hockey parent and the pressure that they put on their young kids. And we have Brody, who's a co-host, and he's got kids, obviously, as everyone knows now. And that they're hearing this podcast for the first time. And we have two other co-hosts that help out, and they got kids and they coach their boys too. And they're great hockey parents, but you always hear that crazy hockey parent. Matt, is there any advice? We'll start with you, and Alex, you can follow up, but any advice that you could say to a parent that could help them out on not being that crazy hockey parent, and how their pressure that they put on their young ones that might cause into, problems that they would need Mindbuffs and other departments to help out?
I've actually, I don't know about you, Alex. I've had a lot of sessions where I've got the parent and the kid in the session, and we actually have this conversation. And 90% of the time, it's because the parent doesn't know what they're experiencing in those moments. That the parent doesn't realize that the way that their brain interprets their kid having a bad game is the parent thinks that they're not good enough or they're a failure. So when they're seeing their kid not play perfectly, it's actually the parent that's getting frustrated at themselves and just projecting it towards their kids. The parent needs to be able to do the same amount of work that the athletes are doing if they want to see, themselves and their kid get to where they want to get to. That pressure is always projection. Kid plays bad, looks bad on parent. Kid plays bad, I look like I don't know what I'm doing and I haven't been teaching my kid very well. And so these conversations are always about the parent needing to check in to see if they even understand what kinds of emotions they're experiencing when they're watching their kid. These are really tough sessions, but unfortunately the answer is, the parents need to spend the time to figure out why they are getting so animated and frustrated at watching their kid do something that hopefully they still love to do.
Something to add on, I go into a little bit more depth in terms of, it's called the athletic triad. So if you think of obviously a triangle, the athletes have their own roles and responsibilities in their sport. So in hockey, like if I'm working with a team, like the forwards have their responsibilities, defense, goalies will really break that down. The parents also have roles and responsibilities too. So what are those roles for them individually to think about? And then the coaches as well have their own roles. I guess I would say my biggest piece of advice to parents too is your job is really to respect coaches and their decisions and to support your kid in the best ways that you can. I know my brother played hockey, so I'm familiar with the car ride homes and oh, you should have done this out there, done that. And like the coaching all starts to happen in the car ride home. Yeah. And so I often have very frank conversations with parents that's the coach's job. Your job is to support your child and give them the resources that they need to be the best, but not to have those negative conversations in the car ride home.
Yeah, exactly.
The very first team session that I have with teams, the question that I ask is, how many of you guys, by show of hands, has one of those beautiful car rides to and from the arena? And I get like half to 3/4 of the players putting their hands up and their head going down. Kids know what they've done wrong.
Yeah.
They do not need a parent over analyzing and critiquing every little thing that didn't go perfectly.
Yeah.
Kids need space to be able to process what just happened. And so, yeah, those car rides, ugh,
yeah,
don't like them.
No. All right. So we appreciate you guys coming on. So how can people get a hold of you guys? What's the best avenue for that, Matt?
So right now, Alex and I work with an amazing team of people at Emdr Power, Power Psychology in Sherwood Park. And so they can book with us online at emdrpower.com. By the end of this year, Mindbuffs will have its own building, its own space. As we alluded to earlier, things have been growing quite quickly, and there's going to be other people on the team as well by then. So we'll be able to be more easily accessible that way. But to start, you can go emdrpower.com to straight up book with us, or go to our website, mindbuffs.com, and to get a bit more information about the different things that we do, and to communicate more one-on-one if you need more information.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on 2 Mutts Podcast today. This is an honor to have you guys on. I know we've been talking about it for a while, and finally we got to connect. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us. Anytime people in the public space want to talk about sports psych, and Alex and I are going to be there in a matter of seconds. So
Perfect. All right. Well, take care, and all the best to you guys going forward.
okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.